being here in such a large number, right? So we all know about the saying, right? That stagnant water gets dirty. We all know about it, right? Well, the knowledge which is kept stagnant also gets dirty and useless, just like the dirty water. How do you keep your knowledge useful? Like just like for the water to stay clean, it has to flow. Your knowledge also has to flow. And here at Equal Experts, we believe in keeping the knowledge flowing. And we try to do it at every point of time. While developing, we continuously do pair programming. So we keep sharing our knowledge and passing it with each other. So there is a full circle going around as the rotation happens. Apart from that, every week we also have lunch wrap sessions, also called as brown bag sessions. Beyond that, there is also a weekly expert talk session, like what we are having today, where Mark would be talking about some cool stuff in architectures. We'll get back to that in some time. Um, but today we are especially partnering with GDG to host Google I/O as well on the same day. So a lot of tech sessions going around at the same time. Uh, just to give a quick follow-up, apart from normal session, there is also an annual expert talk session or a conference that happens. The link is generally posted. But soon we'll be presenting a link here. If you are interested, do join the Equal Experts Slack. Right? There will be a QR code presented. Tanay? Yeah. So I think we can again put it back on the screen later, and feel free to join it. Yep. Thank you very much. Over to Mark. He's going to talk about architecture. Just a brief intro why architectures are important. We all generally talk about languages, frameworks, and all that stuff, right? But when we are changing a language or when we are changing a framework, we not only change a technology, we are also changing architectures, right? React and Angular are not different from the language they are using, they are different in their architecture. Right? When you are changing from normal Android development to Flutter, you are changing an architecture. When you are changing from Flutter to React Native, you are again changing an architecture. So you can't miss or you can't run away from architecture. How do you make the best choice of what you need to go about? That's where the choice of architecture come into place. Right? Over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you, everybody. I don't think so. Yeah, I got the microphone. Yeah, I say my voice. Yeah. So yeah. All right. Okay. Well, thank you, and welcome to Expert Talks in Pune today. Thanks everybody for turning up. Much bigger crowd than I expected, I've got to admit. But thank you. We're going to talk today about where architects fit into modern IT projects. So I'll just give you a little bit of info about myself. My name is Mark Dickinson. I've been an architect for Eagle Experts for a couple of years on the back of a 20 plus year career in IT. I began as a developer, I moved into consultancy, and as I started to do that, I moved away from a single tech stack of Microsoft in the early days to become more comfortable with different stacks, different languages. And I found that the majority of my work then started to become about finding out more about where technical issues and technical activities align with business goals. And that often means that I get sent into projects where we're looking at why the delivery cadence isn't what we want it to be, or why we're looking at why there's a technical problem that's difficult to solve. So the type of work that I tend to do, I think, is a fairly good niche for an architect to be. So as we go through this talk, it's nice of Anai to give us an intro of architecture and the problems that it solves. But I think we might find that architect as a job title might not quite mean what you think it means, and hopefully we'll cover that. I'm going to cover why we should consider where architects fit. I'm going to cover the different roles and what it's about. I'll cover how architects can help with projects, and then I'll take a short question and answer session afterwards, if that's okay with everybody. So let's get started then. Where do architects fit in modern IT projects? Well, why would I ask that question? And the reason why I would say that there's a question around where architects fit is that architecture is a very commonly used word in IT. I mean, anybody who's even remotely involved in IT will have heard the word architecture mentioned, and they'll have been talking about it themselves, and they'll be keen to form biases around what architecture means for themselves. You find that many people are keen to use the architecture word to frame debates that they want to have, to lend more gravitas to things that they want to try and explain to people. So it's very commonly used. But how many of the people that are using the A word actually know what it involves? How many people actually understand that there's things to capture, there's things to give back, and what when we're saying that what we're talking about is architectural, does it just mean abstract or does it mean something else? And because of that sort of misconception around architecture, you do find that a lot of people view architects with, let's say, suspicion. I think that people sometimes become, in technical roles, sometimes people become apprehensive where architects get involved with their work. And that also, for managerial people, they sometimes think that are architects taking away control over what they think would be there. So there's a lot of misunderstandings that challenge that, and that's why I think the question's worth asking, where do architects fit? Why have I chosen modern IT projects when I could have said something else perhaps? Well, yeah, I deliberately avoided agile, and I'll come back to more about why. But I mean, specifically, I didn't want to tie myself down to a particular framework and try and frame myself against that. And also in the way that equal experts practice architecture, we don't believe in prescribing a framework to people. We'll work collaboratively and pragmatically with people to find out more about what it is, what's going to make the right fit for them in terms of what parts of agile methodologies that we want to use and work there. And also, the choice of the word modern for the type of projects that I want to talk about is that software design has been compared to architecture, certainly since the 60s, as people started to build more complex IT systems. And back in the 60s, let's face it, we're talking about like systems that take up whole buildings to implement. People started to think about architecture as a way to explain the type of design work that they were trying to do. But also architecture, software architecture as a term, has only really become something that has become prevalent as a word since the 90s. And the reason for that is that you were more likely through the 80s to have a computer in your home, you were more likely to have used many different software products, so there's a proliferation of software products being built. Some of them are complex, most of them need architecture to be involved. It's much more likely that you'll become aware of software architecture in the nature of the things that you use in the day-to-day world. But in nearly 30 years since software architecture started to become prevalent as a term, a lot of things can change. So back in the 90s, people were talking about things like tape drives, floppy disks. You'd be looking at having massive installations of server racks and cooling for things, where nowadays we can just drag and drop things onto a screen and have architecture. So a lot of things can change, but a lot of the challenges and a lot of the opportunities for architects remain the same. So why would we question the role of an architect? So a lot of people will claim to be architects. As we said, a lot of people are comfortable to use the word architecture in projects. A lot of people will claim that they are actually architects. So let's just have an inspection around that and look at it. I mean, in terms of management roles, you find that when you go into places as an architect or you join a company as an architect and speak to different stakeholders from across organisations, you find that people that have moved into management roles will quite often say during a conversation, oh yeah, I used to be an architect, or I did some architecture once. And what that will really translate into is that they probably through their career designed a system, built a system, were a tech lead on something important, and that they consider their input to be architectural. So it's true. We should respect that. If you're in post as an architect and you meet people who don't have that in their job title, but they say something like, I used to be an architect, they did. it's true, respect it. Understand that they contributed in an architectural way to something, and they feel that that gives them the level opportunity to speak to you as an architect and say, yeah, I can talk to you about this, I understand what you're talking about. But we should also be aware with management people is that through their experience in their career and how they got to solve the problems that they got to solve, it's easy for them to sometimes dismiss certain architectural concerns that they didn't find important, and sometimes they get called non-functional requirements, sometimes they get pushed to the side, and yet their contribution is still architectural. I mean, delegation is an important part of management, but it doesn't mean that I get to push away all the things that I don't find shiny and attractive and then make that someone else's problem. So it's worth just thinking about that when you meet management people who claim to be architects. Respect it is probably true. Another group of people that lead me to question the role is the UX community. So user experience, it's not just drawing pictures, it's the whole design of a user experience. So there's a massive skill set in those people. They'll have come from a diverse variety of backgrounds, and not just at art college. They will know how to work computer systems, use computer systems, and design experiences that people find engaging. So if they think they've designed a system to such an extent, they will have architected it. And it's true, respect their architectural contribution. Chances are that a lot of user experience people have come from, done some low-level computing in their career at some point. They may have worked on database design or something like that. And so they'll feel that their contribution at low level and into the architectural stack of what you're producing is valid. And it certainly is, respect it. But also, just be aware of the fact that when they were doing their low-level work and moving into that specialism, as they've moved into the user experience specialism, you probably find that they've moved away from that, and the experience that they have and the biases that they formed may not be quite up to date. So if they were basing their database input on their experience, but they've not been doing that for 5 years, there's a lot of different choices that you can do now, and there's a lot of different choices that you can make quite easily that would change how their bias works for them. So it's always worth thinking about that. The next bullet point that I've got on here is the thinkers. So I mean people like system thinkers and design thinkers. It's certainly worth considering the fact that these people are people who've got a massive level of experience in what they do, and they understand the concept of system thinking or design thinking. They can take the motivations of people, the drivers, and make sure that systems will be fit for purpose and that they'll work. Well, that certainly sounds architectural to me. So again, we've got to respect it. They take a holistic view of the wider system, what it's for, what's going to make it work, how it should be used. And they're right, they're architects. But it's got to be thought of that in the way that that's done, it can sometimes take people along with a ride where they're told that yes, because we thought of everything from the outside, everything's going to be okay on the inside. It's totally important for architects to think about, yeah, we see this happening, we don't need to be obstructive in it, we can help people that are working in a design thinking methodology to get the best out of their solution and not get tripped up later in the day. So the final group that, I don't know whether it's going to strike a chord with people in here, but certainly a group of people that have always made me think about why we question the role of an architect is the really good developers. So whenever I go to a new company or a new organisation and I want to talk about architecture to people, I'll interview the various different groups of people, so UX people, thinkers, the management, the testers, the infrastructure people. I'll get to the development team and I'll get to the architects, hopefully last really, because I want to find out what they think and put what their thoughts are in context with what I've discovered in my diagnostic. I'll ask the question to really good to architects. Does architect at this company mean really good developers? And it's a great question to ask because it's quite telling. It says a lot about the people. If they answer yes, they're instantly saying to you that they consider themselves to be the best developer, which is great, but it's also suggesting to me that they've missed something in what architecture is about, because if they still feel the need to get on the tools all the time, chances are they're missing the architectural things that they should be catching. And the thing about that is that when they're very close to day-to-day problems with teams, architects may not be adding the best value that they can add. Architecture is not just the end of a development baseline, it's not when you've gone from junior dev to senior dev to tech lead to architect. It's not just about that. As you're changing into an architect from a developer, you're giving something away, same as you would be if you're going into management. You can't do all the work yourself. You're there to do something a little bit different. So I seem to be asking a lot of questions in the presentation so far, but I've got one more. Why question where architecture fits? And the reason that I bring that up is that I find there's a lot of trends in modern projects and a lot of challenges to my experience going on site at different companies and introducing myself as an architect. There are quite a lot of trends that can derail my efforts or the architecture team's efforts. And so what I'm referring to really, I mean the first one's not really a trend. Delivery at pace has always been a thing. People will always want, can I just get it quicker? Can I just have this quicker? Can I get it now? I had one client that once said to me, I don't want architecture, I just want a really beautiful sequel. But that person, unfortunately, totally missed their deadline and had to spend a lot of money rectifying the problems that they got with their beautiful sequel, when they could have had a diagram right at the start, which would have said, yeah, we don't need to do quite a lot of this work. Just worth just thinking how delivery at pace affects it. It's not really fair to call it a trend, it's always going to be there. But I did mention about why I hadn't chosen Agile as the title for this talk. And the reason that I've chosen that is that on quite a lot of projects where some Agile coaches work in this way, I know a lot of good ones that certainly don't, but you'll find that people make some assumptions around Agile, and they'll say to you, I don't need loads of documentation. I just want to use Scrumban Latte 4.5, and then that makes it all okay to sort of say, yeah, we don't need architects, we can just get on with it, and it'll all be great. That looks fantastic. Good luck with that. Quite often, the fact is that in ceremonies and in Agile practice, there's things like 3Amigo meetings where it's very useful, and there's some preconceived ideas about who should be in those 3Amigo meetings. If you're thinking about doing something novel and different that might go outside the very easy things to achieve, you want to start thinking about, maybe I should get an architect there. It's not to draw some massive UML diagram of everything, it's to capture a quick sketch of what the spirit of the conversation was, and then that spirit of the conversation will remain. And if we find we're challenging it, we've got a reason to go back and question and groom the backlog and work with the ceremonies so that we get the best output. So it's worth just thinking about it, because it's quite easy for Agilists to think that they don't need architecture, we should just be getting things done and finding out fast. You can find out a lot faster on a whiteboard than you can in an IDE. The other thing I brought thinking up again, it's just like I say, with regard to thinking, a holistic view of everything and being easy to omit detail, it's a case of capturing that, working with people in their methodologies on projects and saying, okay, the whole thing about the approach is great, but we still need to be making sure that we capture things that are problematic and feed those back to the right people so that we get the right outcomes and we don't get tripped up and find that our expectation is way out of step with reality. The user experience people, again, what I've brought that back up for is the fact that a lot of these people are super clever. As I mentioned before, they are actually architects, and it's thinking about the fact that where they've got experience or they've done work that validates the fact for them that they don't need an architect, it's worth getting the opportunity and having the conversations to think about, okay, you've done all this user research, you've done all this ethnography, but there are some issues with what you think is the non-functional requirements. They are going to trip you up. You do need to address them early, and it gives you a clue of when you should have the conversations. The final thing, and again, I'm not so sure it's a trend, but as an architect turning up on site or having job interviews for architecture roles, you find that you quite often get told that we don't want an ivory tower architect. Well, I've seen some ivory tower architects who are fantastic and have massive value to companies if they're used in the right way. I think the reason why people have this bias against ivory tower architecture is that for technical people, they don't like being watched. If people are developing and they feel that the architecture is just sort of spying on them and making their life more difficult, they're going to feel a lack of autonomy. Developers are super creative people, and so actually they need autonomy, otherwise they're not going to be very successful. So it's really important for architects to think about that. If they could be misconstrued as an ivory tower architect, it gives them a clue of when they ought to have conversations and what type of conversations they should be having to get rid of that misconception about what's there. It makes people feel that they're not trusted. If you've got somebody up in the tower watching you, it makes you feel like you're not trusting people. So if you're doing that and you question the value of your own work, what's the point in doing all this development effort if the architect's just going to turn up at the end of the sprint or the end of the quarter and say, that's no good, that's no good. Have the conversations, make things work for people and get some buy-in for the ideas that are coming out. One final reason why ivory tower is an issue for people, especially people who are interviewing, is that business people, they want you down in the trenches. If you're not part of the design team or the business team, then really you should be cutting code, shouldn't you? You should be at the code face, checking in all the time. Well, if you're finding in your experience that you're an architect rather than a developer, maybe coding isn't the best value you can add. Maybe helping people to write more effective code and getting more coherent features online so into production is where you can help out better. So, having done all those questions, it's time to think about the truth about architects. Because thinking about the truth about architects might help us to find a place to fit and a reason to be. The truth about architects, as I hope I've alluded to through the previous questions, is that everyone is an architect. Everyone's going to form an opinion or a bias about something. If I show you the building across the street and ask you what you think to it, you're going to say, well, it looks like a nice residential building. Windows could be a bit bigger. I'm not so sure why there's some security bars on the fourth floor, but hey, might be a good reason for it. Let's find out why. The thing is, everybody's going to have an opinion or a bias, and the biases affect the way you go about your day-to-day life. In IT, they affect the way you go about your role. So if you have opinions about the architecture as you see it, whatever role you're in, you're going to respond to the architecture in a certain way. So in an organisation, this everyone is an architect idea goes all the way up to the CEO. The CEO is actually the chief architect because they're in charge of the vision. They get the vision, they communicate the vision, it gets relayed out to the C-suite, and then it filters its way down to management and down to the shop floor. In enlightened organisations, that's a cycle, because the vision is informed by activity on the shop floor. The management are comfortable to communicate. The C-suite are happy to find new inputs and work out how they can better align the vision. So a good feedback loop on where that's happening in companies, it makes it a lot easier to see where architects fit in communicating, in helping these feedback loops to be successful and helping them to add value. What's an architect supposed to do? So, is really an architect, thinking back to the civil architecture metaphor that I put out, is that your job is to make it safe to experience something that will be built. If you're building a building, the first thing you have to do is make it safe. That's the most important thing about any building. It's certainly the most important thing about any software. When I'm talking about software and IT, safety means things like security, making it so that you're not going to lose your data, you're not going to lose money, people can't get your personal details. It's thinking about things like privacy, making it so that people don't get to see information that they shouldn't see. People can't exploit that for any nefarious reason. It's thinking about things like resilience. So if you depend on a system, you need it to always be on. So you can't just go, oh yeah, the drawings are wonderful, it all looks like a great piece of software. It needs to be resilient. If people depend on it, it needs to be on. If lots of people are going to use something, it needs to not fall over. It needs to respond in a good way to high levels of demand. Or it needs to turn off when there's low levels of demand. And so scalability is a really important concern, which may get missed in certain other aspects of what we call architecture. So the other thing that we've got to do is make it beneficial to experience the thing. What if we've got user experience people and business analysts? Surely they should be doing that. Well, yeah, definitely, that's true. But architects play a role in it. I mean, you've got to ensure that the software that you're building or the system that you're building is fit for purpose. Sure, you get help with that. But you've also got to make sure that return on investment is going to be in that software. So shouldn't other people be doing that? Yes, they certainly should. But it's helpful to speak to an architect and say, if my scalability solution means I have to do this with my server farm, that's going to really start to diminish its ROI. As it scales up, it gets more and more expensive until your cost to serve becomes too much and the system's not worth scaling. So you're thinking about things like that and informing decisions, getting involved, finding out what's going on there. And when you're doing things like that, you get control of cost, thinking about how your Azure estate is actually billing you or what's going on there. So it's making it so that you've got this view. You're not into everyone's business, but you're helping them make decisions. And if you hear that you hear of decisions that you think, oh yeah, it sounds like they're making this assumption about how something's going to cost me later on, or how it's going to perform in service, then you're thinking, yeah, I can get involved in that. It's worth me being involved because I can help the feedback loop to work smoothly, and I can help that enlightenment fit into the organisation. Making it enjoyable. Definitely, make it enjoyable to use something else nobody will want to use it. Yes, user experience will play a massive role in that. That's what user experience is. But architects also play a role. You've got to make sure that there's no quirks in the underlying systems. there's proper error handling, there's proper logging, people understand what's going on there, because if that starts to manifest itself on the front end, it's going to upset people. And so things that were non-functional requirements are suddenly going to become very functional because the phone's going to ring and you're going to be asked to explain why you didn't spot that. So get involved in the conversations, definitely worth the trouble. I also put in fit or contrast. When I say fit, I'm talking about things that integrate well. So thinking about making systems and software that doesn't cause problems upstream and block the flow into your application. And also being responsible about making systems and solutions that don't inundate products that are downstream from you as well. That's going to really help with the sort of impedance matching of what you can do with your software. It's also making sure that things like don't produce waste, don't just start making artifacts that don't add any value, and working out things like that. They sound very trivial concerns, but they're easily overlooked, and who else is going to catch them if architects don't catch them? So think about that and get involved in the conversations. Make things maintainable, make it so that there's not a growing body of effort and cost that's going to be lost to maintenance, when actually, with a few conversations early on, that could have been eliminated. I finally put on that point about contrast. You might be making something that's deliberately set to upset things, so you might be in the sort of DevOps space, and you might be making things like that are deliberately supposed to stop things or break things, and if that's what the intent is, it's just as important as making things fit, so think about that. The thing is, with the role of what an architect's supposed to do, you've got to think about what an architect's not supposed to do. So what an architect's not supposed to do, and you see it in a lot of companies that have traditional architecture functions, an architect's not supposed to stop people from getting what they want. So a lot of architecture functions do that, a lot of architectural teams become the gatekeepers, and it makes life very hard. It makes the business want to go around them, it stops people engaging with them, and it makes them a fair bit of an irrelevance, which is why I'm led to question where architects fit in modern IT projects, because a lot of modern companies seem to be waging war on their architecture department, but you can see why when all the architecture department does is say no. What an architect isn't supposed to do is force people to work in certain ways. So if we're sat in this supposed ivory tower, we shouldn't be dictating to people in dev teams what code base they should be using, how to use their IDE. We shouldn't be getting into those things with people. Development people and user experience people, designers, they all need to have the autonomy to work in the way that they want. So rather than forcing people to work in certain ways, you should be providing what I call the rumble strips, some guidelines that if you work within these guidelines, you're free to do what you like. If you hit the edge of the guidelines, there's a great way to engage with us, and we'll help people to solve problems and keep things rolling so that their work's enjoyable and we're not causing any dangers to people. What an architect's definitely not supposed to do is bring late concerns which derail project timelines. It's absolutely no good at all for an architect to turn up at the end of a software delivery and say, we've missed some important piece of functionality. It wasn't drawn on drawings, nobody's talked to us about it, but now you've got to put certain security protocols in there, or you've got to make sure that some feature that was assumed to be a non-functional requirement is there. That can really harm projects. It ruins the credibility of architects. It ruins the credibility of the development effort if that conversation is not had. So the points I made before, they all allude to left shifting the conversations, making sure they happen early so that something can be done and planned in. Understand that these things aren't always spotted by all the different people that have definitely got architectural interest but not responsibility, and keep that credibility there. And the final thing that architects are not supposed to do that I've seen lots of evidence of is pick on details which have no value. So this typically comes from the architects who think they're the best developers, is that they'll point out things in people's code at low level. It's a really harmful way for architects to carry on, because it's a thing that makes people in technical teams wary of talking to the architects. You can spot bad code from across the room. You can see long methods, top-heavy constructors, massive test fixtures. You can see all those problems from a distance. You don't need to go and pick on individuals. You don't need to pick details that have no value and get into battles with people. You can start and show what good looks like in a whole different way, communicate that more positively. And the sooner you do that in a project life cycle, the more engagement and the more buy-in you're going to get, which gives you more permission to be an architect. You're supposed to be wise. You're not supposed to be a gatekeeper. I'm not too sure about these two owls here. I mean, owls are always said to be wise, but they also look like gatekeepers. And I think it's really important to to understand that certainly if you came out of a technical background but there's other routes into architecture, but certainly if you did that, please don't be a gatekeeper. Show people through your willingness to talk and your willingness to get involved early that you're wise. Don't hold people up. I'm going to give these guys the benefit of the doubt because I think it's quite a cool picture, but we'll see. So then, growing into the role, I mean, having there's other routes into architecture that I've maybe not discussed. I've seen business analysts, product owners that have become architects. There's absolutely no reason that that can't happen. These people have got massive IT experience and have portfolio careers, so why not be an architect? Certainly something that can happen, something that I've seen in other places and it's worked successfully. I'm hoping that some of the things in what I've said have triggered people's emotions. I'm hoping that people are thinking that I've got feelings about some of the things that Matt just said, and in my context, when I go back to my role, I can think about how I do that and how I can make some changes. But in terms of growing into the role, how do you get started as an architect, in a world full of architects where everybody's an architect? How do I actually mark myself out in that role and achieve that? So it's worth thinking about a common route into architecture. So as we mentioned, the developer route is probably the most common way. And as you've noticed in your day-to-day work that you're maybe more of an architect than just a developer, is that you'll start to heckle at stand-ups. People moan about the day-to-day troubles, and you'll think, you could do that differently. You don't need to have that. You can change the way you do it. And so it's not such a useful contribution, but it's still a contribution. And as you start to mature, you'll start to think about challenging in design meetings. So thinking about where designs are being put by the tech leads, and you're noticing that there's something different that you want to contribute, you start to challenge. And as you find the success of that varies, you'll start to learn how to challenge in a constructive and useful way and solve the problems. You might start to make off-the-wall suggestions at retros. If the same thing's been in the could be better column for the last 3 sprints, you're going to maybe think, you know what, let's try something different, and then talk about it and communicate it. And at first, it'll fall on deaf ears, but as you start to become aware of what works and what doesn't, challenging becomes a more constructive activity. It gives you a way to find better ways of building things. So it's not necessarily always about doing it quicker, it's about eliminating things that might constrain you later on. Maybe thinking about, yeah, I can do this quick, but it'll cause technical debt. But this technical debt is going to cost me next week, not next year. I need to think about it. You need to think about it anyway. Technical debt's bad. But the other side of the route is that for a lot of developers, before they're ready to take that plunge and become architects, they become a tech lead. So in a tech lead role, you're going to become responsible for dealing with bad design. So design decisions are going to come and be bad from within the team, maybe from within yourself. And they're going to be things that you want to sort of deal with and work out in a constructive way. You've got to deal with the fact that through experience and how you get yourself as a developer, as a tech lead, you've got to find constructive remedies and how to start communicating that back. A lot of tech leads, really a high percentage of what their work is architecture, and it's thinking about when they find that they enjoy that and add more value through it and getting on the tools. That's where the time comes to start thinking about the different job title and understand that. The other side of the tech lead is dealing with bad requirements. So bad requirements, I mean, I could produce amazing software if I didn't get so many bad requirements. It would be so easy. But bad requirements are going to come, and they're going to come from different business stakeholders. I find that there's like a maturity around how to deal with bad requirements, where at first you start to say yes and figure out how to get it in. But the middle sort of stage of maturity is where you start to say yes, but it's going to cost you in this way. And all that does is make the people asking you the questions and coming with these bad requirements, it makes them figure out how to gamify it, figure out how to say it to you in such a way that you'll let it through and get into the software. So think about that, those bad requirements, and think about what I'd rather do. Rather than be the yes but person, I'd rather be the yes and. Can I take you to a picture and show you what that's going to cost you so that you don't try and game the argument? There's no way to game it. The picture's a common understanding, and we should be working towards that and seeing if we want to change it, is that truly a worthwhile thing to do? The thing about that is that you start to notice that making things visual and making things visible is a really important part of what architecture is and how that reflects in the role. Another route into architecture just worth mentioning, and it's something I've not really covered much in detail so far in the talk, is testing. So testing, so for a while I spent a lot of time doing testing, very interested in automated testing and working out how that can accelerate production. Poor test coverage probably means poor architecture. Chances are it's only poor test coverage, because it was hard to do the test. There's the difficulties in the design. Down at class level, it's hard to do dependency injection. It's hard, you've got long methods that are full of actually hidden classes. There's loads of stuff that Uncle Bob can teach you about how you can spot bad architecture due to poor tests. But things like brittle tests as well, it's like, yeah, we let this through if this test fails, because sometimes it passes and we don't really know why. We should go and find out why, mostly by writing more tests. And the interesting thing about it, which I sort of noticed as I was writing this out, is that actually tests are the mould that your software is cast in. So if you think about it, it should form the silhouette of your software, your test suite should show that. And that gives you a real clue as to where deficiencies are in the architecture, and that actually this ability to test is your ability to change. Testing gives you confidence to change, and you should be able to change in a way that the business requires you to change. So that's quite important. Testers and QAs are natural allies to architecture, so it's worth thinking about how that can happen and what can be done. Yeah, sorry. So, sorry guys. So yeah, testers and QAs are natural allies, and it's worth thinking about how you can embrace that, and how a good architectural function will have really good close links with the testing function, and make sure that those things can be visible. Okay, so being an architect, how do you get started? How do you get into an organisation, integrate and make an impact? Well, quite important to get the right job. There's a broad range of opportunities. If you type architect into a job search, you're going to find lots and lots of jobs, lots and lots of variety of architecture. It's really important to read the small print, find as much as you can about what's in that job, because a good chunk of architecture jobs aren't the sort of architecture that you'll want to be doing. There'll be different meanings. We discussed the biases and things, opinions that people form about architects, and that reflects in the opportunities that are available. So where you see high levels of qualification on the actual job title, you probably know that you're going to be doing quite a specific role, and you need to think if that's right for you. You need to be selective and think that if you're an enterprise architect and you want to cover a wide variety of architectural domains but not at too great a depth, then you need to look for that in the signs of the job descriptions. You need to recognise your own strengths in terms of how you communicate, how you prefer to do things. Are you a deep problem solver, or are you a broad generalist, and work out what's out there. And read in the job descriptions about smells in the company of how their architecture function may be working before you arrive. So think about things like how they think that your role might be a gatekeeper role. You're there to check people's code. You're there to ensure the deep code quality of things. Think about what that really means for your day-to-day job. Do you want to mark people's homework, or do you want to set strategy for people going forwards? So the best thing to sort that out is ask lots of questions. Think about the things that influence your biases towards architecture, and make sure that they're being reflected in the role, in the job description, and in the way that you get in there. Test yourself. So before you even go for interview perhaps, but certainly after interview, test yourself. Having asked all the questions, do you line up? Are your values and the things you like to do things that line up with the company's values and the things that they like to do? It's going to be a lot easier to line up if you've got something that you feel that the company's lacking. So if you feel that, yeah, there's no feedback loop, I can really help with that, that's great. If you feel that there's no great strategy, then, and you feel you can help with that, that's a great opportunity. Do you feel that there's poor governance at low level which you can help with? Again, that might be something that you're genuinely interested in too. But you've got to find out whether they're genuinely interested. So when you're asking the questions, and when you're telling people about yourself, you've got to think about, are the people genuinely interested? The interviewer is always going to want to look good in the interview, so they're going to say, yeah, we do that, yeah, we've got great practice, we've got a brilliant team. Find out about them if they're genuinely interested, or do they just want some magic person to come and fix everything? Well, that's not what architects do. Architects help people to fix things, and so you need a genuine level of interest. And so bearing in mind that there might be a gap between how interested people say they are and how interested they really are you pragmatic enough to take the pain and the disappointment of finding out that, yes, we said we'd do this, but actually we've got this problem to fix first, Are you pragmatic enough to take that on board and keep in mind the targets that you've got? And if you are, then you've probably got a very positive answer to will your work stick? Because you've found people that are genuinely interested, you're prepared to go the distance with them and make sure they're getting the value from what you do, and your work will likely stick and not be volatile in the organisation going forwards. So the first 100 days as an architect, I mean, sounds totally obvious, get some clear goals, but the first 100 days for an architect, people have their biases, people have their misconceptions about what you're there to do. So you need clear goals so that you can say, I'm going to do this and I know why I'm about. You need to get some short-term goals. So in my successful architectural gigs, I've found that you need some troubleshooting goals. You need some things that you're going to make an impact with. They may be strategic, they may be at sort of software component level, they may be to do with a piece of commercial off-the-shelf software, but you're going to think about how I address that and solve a problem that people have had. So first 100 days you need to get that sorted out. You also need some mid-term goals which are going to think about sustainable pace, sustainable hardware provision, sustainable software products, the roadmap, the way that's going to work, problems that people have with their agile cadence meeting the annual roadmap. They're sort of mid-term goals that you'll want to think about. So they're worth getting on board, and also long-term goals. So you're thinking about things that influence the system of record. You're thinking about having a 3-month, a 6-month, and a 2-year plan. That 2-year plan, yeah, they're going to be pretty sort of broad things that are on there, but you need to be thinking about how you're going to align with those goals and how the things that you're doing in your mid-term plan prove that you're aligning and that you're getting the whole sort of threads of architecture are coming together. So to make that happen, you're going to need to get down with the teams. So the delivery people and the business stakeholders, you're going to have to get down with them and understand, speak to people on the ground, find out what their real problems are. So there's what happened in the design meeting, there's what happened at the Agile Ceremony meeting and what people said. That's wonderful, but actually take some time to go to people's desks and say, I heard you talk about that, what do you really feel about it? I think there's some different ways you could look at for doing it. I could help you out with that if you want and take some time and use things. Make sure people use any spare personal development time. If they would like to be guided in that, make sure that you're there to help them and make sure that you're having the conversations and getting the buy-in. But the important thing about that is to stay out of the weeds. So it's very easy to, in the process of getting down with teams, it's very easy to get drawn into battles that have been going on forever about some low-level component. It's really crucial to sort of understand that you're there, you want to help, but actually you can't be diverted from this 100-day plan you've got to help with that and build friendships, work with people in a good way, but stay out of the weeds. The thing is that with that, you probably find as well that a lot of people will be keen to talk to you, but it's worth taking the time as an architect to pick the less vocal team members. If you see people that don't want to speak up, try and take some time, catch them at the water cooler, catch them at the lift and just say, hi, I heard you, you look concerned about this but you didn't say anything. Is there anything I can help with? Be friendly, work out what could happen, because quiet people sometimes have some great ideas that don't come out. It's worth taking time. And cycle around those things that you do with the team and the management. You don't throw people under the bus, you don't make it uncomfortable for people to talk to you. You just try and figure out how to frame, use your experience, how to frame things that people are saying to you from real backgrounds, how to put that to the management so that there's no reactive behaviour. We're just working out how to align things more strategically and make that right. And the most important thing is move the needle. So if you find for your troubleshooting goals that you've got something like a database that's going to hit its contention limit, or a Azure file that's going to suddenly start to top out and then the next step is a huge licensing cost issue or something like that, definitely make sure how to fix that. Definitely get that result in your first 100 days, because that's going to earn you the right to do more of your mid-term plan and find more engagement for more strategic things that you want to do. So what's so hard about that? That's just how to be good at your job 101 really. I mean, I don't think I've said anything particularly new there. What's so hard about it? Well, you're going to find frictions. As an architect dropping into technical teams, you're going to find that you've got teams that try to hide. Basically, the things I said about technical teams being sceptical about architects, they're going to encourage people to try and fix it. I've landed on many new organisations where The opening shot from the technical guys was, don't really know why you've come, we've already fixed this, we fixed it 2 days ago. And it's like, that's great. Watch it come 2 weeks into the future and fall over for reasons that they didn't think of. It's not down to people's error, it's just down to this propensity for people to try and hide from architects. And a lot of that's down to hero culture. It's much better for technical people or managers to try and think that they fixed it. That's lovely, but fixing it doesn't always mean aligning with the architectural goal. And when that makes its way back up out of the management levels into the C-suite, they start to wonder why things are expensive to maintain and why things take longer than they're supposed to take. You've got to think about that hero culture, how it can be destructive, and also at the same time you've got to be aware of a whispering culture. So some of those same personalities are going to say, the architecture suggested that I use Elasticsearch instead of SQL Server. That's really crazy. And it's like, why is it crazy? Why don't we just have a conversation about it and talk about why that's there? Because certain solutions are, if I've managed to take a whole load of work that's hitting the database away from the database, I've just moved the needle. I've just made that SQL Server license issue go away for 6 months. So it's worth thinking about it. And if you sense these whispering conversations, don't call out the bad behaviour. Go and speak to them. They're actually the quiet people. They're whispering. So speak to them. Figure out what the issue is and why they're uncomfortable with it, and talk through that. Maybe they've got a good reason they're uncomfortable. Maybe you missed something. Architects aren't perfect. Figure it out. The final bit of friction is, again, when I said about not getting down in the weeds with people, is that at all levels in the company, you're going to find that you've got people who appear very friendly and engaged with you as an architect, and they're going to want you to help them win. So they'll come to you with a problem and talk through it. They'll speak to you very architecturally. It's really wonderful conversation to have, because chances are things have been quite hard with most other people. So you get some friend that comes and they want you to help them win an argument. That's really what they want, but they'll put it to you in a clever way because they've got experience too. They gamified their problem and they're putting it to you in such a way that you go, yeah, you're really onto something there. We'll work together and fix it. The thing is that nobody should want to win the argument. Nobody should have that sort of issue. If architecture is working well and feedback loops are working well, you don't need to help people win arguments. Just have conversations and fix that out. Be aware that whilst there's a lot of really worthy people come and do that to you, it's still a form of getting down in the weeds. It's still something that will burn your time up. And you've got to just remember, you've got a plan. You've got a 100-day plan, you've got a 6-month plan, you've got a 2-year plan. Some of that help me to win is detracting from that and going with their plan instead. So, I hope that's been fairly interesting. Having figured all that out, I suppose we're going to just cover off where architects fit. So, there are many architectural domains. Enterprise architects, Azure architects, SQL architects, solution architects, whatever architects. Recognise that you can't be too deep in them all, and recognise the sort of T-shaped nature of people. If you're an enterprise architect, you're pretty T-shaped. The whole thing about if you're covering a lot of breadth, you can't go so deep with things. So if you're a SQL architect, brilliant, wonderful. But accept that that's not such a broad role, and there are other people better suited to do it. I always sort of follow a 2-step rule where I'm comfortable to talk about things outside my domain and take one step into another domain, but I'm not comfortable to land both my feet in there and then I'm struggling to get back to the architecture that I'm actually fairly, well, hopefully alright at. It's worth thinking about the architecture layers as well, that when we're talking about depth and T-shapedness, that there are really layers of architecture. So thinking about architects that are concerned with solutions at class level, they've got the same problems as architects who are thinking about solutions at service level. And they've got the same problems as people who are looking at enterprise level architecture. They're the same problems. It's just spotting the trends and the frictions and the things that go on so that you understand, I'm solving the same problems, but I'm doing it at this scope. And when I get to the outer limit of what I'm doing, there's somebody else that picks that up. And I need to make sure I've got a good feedback loop with those people so that I can keep that chain going. I have got bullet points for that too, sorry. Creating a healthy ecosystem. So think about actually that ecosystem is something that, again, is a misconstrued word. Some people really want ecosystems because they've heard about them. Some people tried it, got burnt, and now don't like ecosystems anymore. Same as any sort of trend thing in IT. create a healthy one. Think about the whole, whatever level you're working at, think about the fact that you should be making anything that comes in so that it can keep coming in, anything that needs to go out so that it keeps going out. By churning out stuff, you're not causing a problem elsewhere in the ecosystem. Keep it healthy, make sure that there's no sort of top predators in there, make sure that everybody's even and happy, can do what they need to do, and that's with regard to software, it's with regard to people as well. Keep making things safe, beneficial and enjoyable. Think about the boundaries of the things that you're in charge of producing, so if it's systems, software, enterprises, think about the boundaries, think about the ins and outs, think about work coming across those boundaries. Is it your responsibility to transform something that comes in, or should that actually be in the shape that you expect it and people are far better off from having a good consumer-driven contract on that? Think about the logic. Think about how, if you're a solution architect, think about why do I keep having to debug into this library that I use? Well, that's because logic's leaked across, and actually that logic belongs outside of that library, otherwise you wouldn't be stepping into it. Think about things like state. So if you've got server application architectures going on, think about how state should exist. If you've got a RESTful service, it should be representing state every time you call it. There's no need for two things to maintain the state, because that's what REST's about, representing the state. Think how that's leaked across and think about the issues that that can cause. And use the team. Understand that some of that's going to fall into user experience, some of it's going to fall into the people who are systems and Azure people, DevOps. Understand that there's a whole complex ecosystem of people around these ecosystem of products, and that those people are able to help you with what's slipping across boundaries. You can probably hear that at stand-up, you can probably hear people's day-to-day problems and spot, I can see logic leaking out of this app because you're having to fix this all the time. I can see state leaking into that app because you're having to fix this all the time. Pick up on those things, work out how they are, and try and get those visualized as well. Ensure that nothing's leaking, and that will really help to keep coherent architecture going. So, yeah, sorry. By thinking of all of those things, you should be in great shape, but it's a rocky road, and I like to put a picture of rocky road up because it's a great cake that you can make quite easily with your children. You don't need to be fantastic at making biscuits or marshmallows or brownies. You just need to get all the ingredients and pour them in a bucket, and because the architecture is so good, it'll work out just fine. And that's really what's important there, is that whatever level of architecture you're at, you're not into specialising and getting into people in their day-to-day work. You're into making sure that their day-to-day work is safe and going to bring you back the result that you want. So here's where architects fit. They fit really well with teams that have got something new to do. As I said, the sort of mission is to left shift the conversations that you're having. So teams that have got something new to do are brilliant because you're at the start, so you can get involved at the best possible time and get your architectural concerns in there. Architects fit really well with teams who need to change existing systems. So you might be challenging status quo of work, you might be challenging the methodologies that people use, you might be challenging tool sets, but at those points where change is needing to happen, architects need to be involved so you can capture any emergent architecture and feedback any new architecture into teams that needs to be fed. Architects fit really well into service organisations who need to manage their assets. You know, people who've got a large estate of software for whatever reason, or the operations departments of large companies. Architects can help make sense of what's going on, what those software components are supposed to do, how we come up with strategies to converge and replace on single products and narrow down the estate if that's desirable, how to make it safe to expand the estate of different software products if that's appropriate too. And it's also for businesses that want to move at a different pace. So when I've mentioned about not wanting to tie myself to an agile framework, for instance, it's about thinking that where organisations are charged with changing something about the pace at which they can deliver things and come up with a strategy for that, architects are really relevant. It shouldn't just be left to business people to think of that. It should be saying, yeah, it's possible to change at that pace for that reason, but it could change in another way. And we're looking at people's roadmap strategies, looking at people's IT estates. It's a really good time to get involved. When an organisation is thinking about a revamp or a digital transformation, architects should definitely be involved in that and are all too often overlooked and just charged with making that strategy work later on. So complex organisations want to make sense of their systems and what they could do with them. Well, yeah, I think I've covered that off. I mean, it's where people have got very complex challenges. they often have a traditional architectural function which has long since been sort of ignored by the people who are actually doing the work. It's making sure that you're getting involved, having the conversations with people that make you relevant and make the work that you do. By not being a gatekeeper and being an enabler, you're going to get more engagement from complex organisation managerial structure, and you're going to get more authority to make those changes that you need to make. So good architects who are doing those things, they're going to embrace these considerations. So to wrap up, I think that hopefully what I've been talking about helps you to embrace these considerations and think how they can help you be more successful. Firstly is, although I'm into a flexible architecture function that can help people, architecture is a governance function. Architecture is something that should be used to help people to stay compliant, but not used as a stick to beat people with. Governance can be ground up as well as top down, so it's not just sat in an office producing standards, it's about getting involved at the shop floor and seeing how those standards can be implemented and how people will actually want to implement them and make them work. Architects shouldn't become gatekeepers, so it's never a fact that you're saying no to things and stopping things, it's a way of saying, yes, we can, and here's how we're going to do it, and getting people to come with you on the journey. It's good architects enabling ground-up governance. It's making sure that the feedback loops happen, that you're there when the conversations need to be had, that you're engaging people in a friendly way, and making sure that when I say that ground-up governance is possible, it's making sure that it happens and that you're showing the value in it. Having good architects around speeds up production. When I say move the needle, you should be able to prove that by thinking about architectural issues at service level, at software level, at class level, you should be able to show that you're removing work from there, you're making more of the code that gets written able to be released into production, you're making sure that the cost of quality is lower, and you're helping people to deliver more effectively. And a good architect can show that ROI in their work. They can actually say, I've changed the delivery time of this to this, that's an improvement. I've removed the cost of serving this to this, that's an improvement. I've stopped you having to buy new SQL servers in a massive co-located data center, that's an improvement. So that being able to move the needle and show ROI, totally important, and totally important for making you show the worth of an architect in a company. But the most important thing to make you successful is to remember that architects are just people. They've not got a special power. They aren't going to be able to fix things that are broken if nobody changes. They're just people, and the best way to work with people is to just talk to them. And I hope that you've enjoyed the talk and it's been useful for you. It's certainly been a pleasure to give it, so thanks very much.
You have questions? Questions?
Sorry, yes, I did say questions and answers, yeah.
So, actually, I have a question. I was an architect in IT, and I'm from Boston as well. So, one of the questions I have is 90% of the architect's work is done in the first 10% of the project time, at least in traditional IT systems, right? I mean, data models, yeah, sorry.
So 90% of the architect's work is typically done in the first 10% of the project's time. And I have a theory. I think a lot of architects get into this governance issues, teaching people of what to do later, because they're twiddling their thumbs for the next 90% of the time.
Yeah.
So do you think that's productive use of an architect's time? That's one question. And what are the deliverables according to you of an architect? The first 10% of the time, yes, I understand. There's a ER model, there's object model, there's a sequence diagram, etc. DFD maybe, whatever. Right?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, yeah, certainly I would view that as a traditional architect role in a traditional architect function. I think that it's sad in a way that it's 90% that you see it as. For me, it's like, yes, people should be producing documentation, standards, ways forward in the first phases of the project. But this is where it leads me to question the fit. So in agile projects, the first steps of the project don't include an architect at all. Nobody wants those things.
I was talking about traditional projects.
Yeah, so the thing is that agile projects have moved into traditional project spaces, but the traditional functions are still there. So it's a really good question, because if you've got an architect function that's geared up to work for the first 10% of the project, and deliver 90% of its architecture during that time, it isn't much use going forward. And if you've got people sat there twiddling your thumbs, then there is no place for them. I'm sorry, but that's the truth.
That's what typically the developer's perception is.
Yeah.
In large teams especially.
Yeah.
The architects they've done a great job with the diagramming and everything,
Yeah.
which is their deliverable. And sometimes developers don't really understand what the diagrams mean. That's another issue.
Yeah.
So there's the education issue.
Yeah.
One is the education of the architect himself. That's one issue also. Then there's the communication of the vision of the architect to the developers. That doesn't happen typically because the developers don't know how to read sequence diagrams, for example.
Yeah.
Now, if you pull up one of your great architecture diagrams, right here, and do a show of hands, okay, of who can really read that diagram.
Yeah.
And I bet more than 50% of the people in this room will say we don't understand what this means, or we cannot explain what this means.
Totally. No.
That's one insight I had, is that you need to educate yourself better. As I'm not saying anything personal here, but I'm saying a lot of architects come from this CEO becoming an architect kind of thing or whatever, right? I mean, you said testers become architects, and they don't really understand. There's a formal discipline to architecture. There is design patterns. You just can't come up with these things overnight, or you can't just read one book and come up with it. So there's a formal thinking to the whole process. There's algorithms which you need to really know about if you're doing algorithmic software, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's education of the architect himself. That's one issue. Education of the developers in what the architect is doing, in communicating the vision of the architect, in communicating the diagrams. That's an issue. That's a huge issue, I think.
Yeah.
Because even ER diagrams, some developers have trouble reading them.
Yeah.
Just writing SQL or looking at ER diagrams, they have trouble doing that. And there's this great perception that ORM tools will solve all the problems, right? That's another problem, because people think ORM tool, once you put a ORM tool in place, it doesn't really matter how your database looks. Nothing replaces good design. So
Okay.
all these,
Thank you.
yeah, no, not a question. This is a discussion really. So this is short.
You can connect with him.
Just one thing. So all this leads to one more insight. Okay. A lot of CEOs think that IT systems, minus the data, mind you, are a liability, not an asset.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of these things.
And that's the big challenge. So in what you were saying about all the diagrams, the ER diagrams, the sequence, the UML, it's no use. Just throw it. If you feel that about what architects are doing and how little the developers understand about it, then it's really important to understand that you're doing too much architecture. It's of no value. If your developers can't follow it, why do it? If the management just view the IT estate as a liability, just do something different about it. This is what I'm trying to say around the architectural role and how it fits into modern IT projects. Is to think about that you're probably doing too much, that UML doesn't add much value, and think about how the architecture function should change so that it's more engaged for more of the project. Think about the shape of projects so that you're not mandating how they can be architected, because what you're actually saying is that it's a two-way conversation. There's just enough architecture going between them. It doesn't all have to be in UML. But it's also worth thinking about methodologies like TOGAF and Zachman and things like that, and thinking about how they apply, how they can be made useful, because they become onerous structures in their own right, and they push UXers and systems thinkers and design thinkers out. So if you're looking at a modern IT project and commissioning that, architects are just the same sort of boundary pushing enemy that thinkers are and UX people are. And it's thinking about how you make the cadence of it so that architects stay engaged for longer and do less of their work up front. They do things as things emerge, but they're feeding back that loop so that your estate that you're creating as a CEO and as a C-suite person isn't a liability to you. The key thing that I would say about it is that there's a thing that Conway's Law where a company will always produce the systems that communicate in the way this company communicates. There's an extension of that for me that says you should be producing systems that change in the way the company wants to change. So you need your architecture, all that UML and all that stuff. I've been asked for that millions of times. I refuse to do it for most people because it won't get used. It isn't consumable by the people. And that's how you get that impedance down and make it more useful. I hope that's a good answer for your question.
Anyone else has any questions?
There was one third slide which at one point don't make people get what they want. As
Just repeat the question.
So, as I understand it, you wanted to ask about the third point on the slide around stop people getting what they want. Yeah, definitely what an architect shouldn't do. So I worked with an architecture function who the chief architect announced to me that his job was to get a large number of the C-suite in an international company to stop self-serving themselves with applications. But that's really difficult because what can happen with a C-suite person is they can whip their mobile phone out, they can go on the App Store and they can get most applications that they actually want to run their international business with. You can actually see on your iPhone or your Android phone, you can get products that will convince you as a C-suite person that you should just be able to get that software like that. And if your architects have been busy drawing UML and making this a state that you don't trust, that's never going to happen. Your business is going to be spinning like this, and your IT function is going like this, and it's so laborious and it can't be changed. So the architect's job isn't to say, no, C-suite directors will actually pay my bills and make me all the money. You can't have what you want. It's saying, actually what we're going to do is give ourselves the capability to spin up. We're going to find out fast. We're going to rapidly ideate. And we have great practices for doing that. But it's a case of never stopping people from doing what they want. It's like 101 for architects. Never say, stop, we need to stabilise, we need to make everything right. No, we need to make it so that if the business is asking for things that they can get off the App Store, we make it super safe for them to get them as quick as we possibly can. And we make it so that we're capturing what we need to know, so we're not leaking stuff, we're not risking the company's health. And that's what that's about. It's saying that architect is there to enable people. It's not there to stop the C-suite from self-serving. It's there to stop, it's there to make it safe for them to self-serve and make it useful.
Basically, you are saying be innovative rather than copying the previous.
Sorry, could you speak?
I am taking this as you are saying to be innovative.
Yes, well, yeah, certainly be innovative, but it's saying gently that be responsible in that innovation. So if I've got a very successful sales leader who basically runs the organisation off of if this then that and a couple of other things that they found on the iStore, we can't outlaw that successful salesperson. If they're bringing in 20% of revenue, we need to make it possible for that thing that they use and makes them successful to be integrated. But it's that responsibility in the innovation, yeah, certainly.
Anyone else has any questions?
Like today's world is like a fast growing world where we need to deliver the things very fastly. So as my question is typically related to the point, pick on the details which add no value, or maybe the guiding to the team to do not lose the track on that sense. Today's world, we need to keep on mind that time is very precious to us, and we need to deliver the products or anything in faster way. So in that case, how we make our team to be think like architect is not picking up on us, and just they need to guide us like that without losing the time.
Yeah, certainly, thank you. I mean, in that, definitely what an architect's not supposed to do is pick on details. When picking on details, the reason for it is that picking on details doesn't add any value. Just excuse me 1 second. So, what I'm trying to say with picking on details, especially with developers, is that the details that you pick up as an architect, they may reflect on an individual's input into the code, but really that shouldn't ever be an issue. You should never really do that to people. It's not the right way to behave. If you're being pressurized to produce at speed, if you're a developer or a tester that's being pressurized in that way, it's about saying, picking up on challenges to your day-to-day working. So if you find that actually your test coverage isn't so great, but it's not because of bad design, it's because you didn't have time to write all the tests and somebody told you that was okay. It's about going back and finding out why that test coverage isn't where it should be, and working with the person who told that person it was okay to say, yeah, there's a great reason why the test coverage is there, but I can also see by the same token that there's features in the design that make there's a lot more testing needs to be done than there should be, and it's actually revealed to us there's an aspect of the design that could be changed. That's where I think architects can engage for more than the first 10%, because it's saying that I've spotted this pattern in what you're doing, and it doesn't need to go into some massive standard that nobody will read on a massive sheet of paper. It's a conversation that can be had at stand-up or a conversation that can be had at retro and say, I see this costing you, I see that it's making you challenge your delivery at pace, and I can help you to improve it. And it's thinking about that. Where architects are doing that, what they're also doing is removing time that's burnt up on unnecessary testing, they're removing time that's burnt on unnecessary defects, they're removing hot fixes, they're removing issues with source control management that cause issues with actual deployment, and they're giving you more time to concentrate on the craft of coding and the production of new features. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Hemant. Just one question. So, can you suggest some ways on how we can set up effective feedback loops between all the stakeholders? For example, the business, the developers, the BAs, and because the architecture evolves over a period of time. So, how can we efficiently set up good feedback loops?
Yeah, so chances are, if you're an organisation that's got an architect community already, if those architects are attached to teams or they actually form as an architectural function, the start of the feedback loop's actually in the architecture forum. So there probably is an architecture forum, but what you've got to try and do is revitalise that architecture forum so that it's picking up people's problems and using architects that are attached to teams or developers in teams who are actually really architects, getting them to put their feedback. So rather than try to solve the problem themselves away from the architecture forum, they bring it to the forum, they show what's in there, and that's an instant feedback loop. And what that does, it transforms your architecture practice into a cross-cutting concern. So rather than being in line with the delivery team, it's something that goes across and a practice that develops. So you're sharing the practice and you're sharing the benefits, and that should start to help you to understand why you can probably do without a lot of the traditional architectural drawings and things like that. You can start to gain what gives you more value and what gives you more time as an architect to actually start and have the conversations that you need to have with developers, technical people, management people. So the architecture forum's the start of it, and then it's also becoming interested in the cadence of the teams. So thinking about, I always call it impedance matching. So if I've got teams that are delivering in a 2-week sprint cadence, but the organisation has a quarterly roadmap, and they have to deliver to those quarterly roadmap points, then you've got to think how to use the ceremonies in the 2-week sequence so that the organisation can be confident that the quarterly roadmap's being populated rather than just gets to week 13 and we get a nasty surprise. And then you take that cadence and you align it with that. So then you start to see that the issues and details that come out of sprint cadences inform the quarterly roadmap, so that's the management level, and then you're thinking about how their cadence and how they're reviewing their progress against quarterly roadmap, for instance, is going against the annual roadmap. So then you're thinking about how that's going to make its way from the management level to the team level. And that's why an important role for architects and in strategic roles is to think about the operating model. So think about how your development, your testers, your architects, your user experience, your DevOps and your business, and going out then to customers and people in the community, how that all fits together so that your very tight cadences in your dev teams, your slightly slower cadences in your management teams, and your C-suite annual cadence is there. Is that okay? Thank you.
Turning on.
So I can hear you.
Of course. Yeah, so I liked your presentation here. That was really good. I've got a couple of queries. One would be this. The presentation looks to be more towards architects who are currently working or who aspire to be. So it's a two-pronged question which I have for you. One would be, where do you see architecture headed as of now? We are in a particular phase where we are moving from traditional architecture. We have already moved, rather, I would say, and we are going into a different phase where AI is completely taken over, and you have different elements, segments, as well as programs which dictate what needs to be done. So that is the first question for you. The second, if I can ask in one shot, would be for existing architects who are currently in the different domains. For example, I'm in Citrix, so I know a fair bit of what really happens in the architectural front. Um, how do you suggest people who are currently in different domains to mold themselves so that they can come into the umbrella architecture, T-shaped architecture, and definitely head into AI? AI architecture, I would say.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So firstly, the thing about AI becoming more prevalent. I mean, AI is not taking over and replacing the architects just yet, unless I've missed something. The thing about it is that, I mean, 2 years ago it was blockchain, now it's AI. I've seen AI get um, touted into a company where the actual AI was actually just high school maths. It was just dealing with logarithms and spotting patterns in data. There's nothing super exceptional about it. However, you know, let's not pretend AI isn't coming and that there are some brilliant AI solutions out there. The fact is that when I talked about layers of architecture, so when I was thinking about a C# class and I can architect that and work out how its ins and outs work, when I can think about a library and think about how its ins and outs works, AI's a presence really, and you should think about what it's actually doing in the ecosystem. Think about the behaviour of AI systems, think about how they can become polluted with their own intelligence and how you make a strategy for cleaning them up and how they can actually solve that problem for themselves if they're truly intelligent. So it's thinking about things like that and saying that, yes, AI is going to make a massive impact on problems that, when I said about the 30-year change, so I mentioned about how we used to think about massive server installations on floppy disks, and now we can drag and drop all that stuff onto a screen. Well, now we won't have to, because AI will decide when the right time is to start things up and take things down. You still have to make sure that the entities that are being managed by that AI can respond. So humans can respond to it in their own way, and we've got to work out how to measure the effect, and I think that's maybe the UX side of architecture that deals with that. But I would also say that in terms of the internals of AI and the assets that are being managed in the electronic world are still have the same thing. It's still the rocky road pattern. It's still AI is the chocolate stuff and the components of the biscuits. It's that paradigm. The second part of your question, sorry, was how do you get to the T-shaped level from a specialist role? Well, I mean that's personally down to your own personal preference. If you find in your day-to-day work that yeah you're very good at the precision, the precise discrete architecture that you're specialising in, but you spend a lot of your time having debates with people about why your system's useful, its ongoing life cycle, what it's going to be doing. You have to trade something off. There's no way to avoid it. It's the same way as a technical person might want to move into management. As you move into management, you can't stay on the tools all the time. You have to start to think about delegating. If you're moving out of being on the tools into the T-shape, the higher enterprise architecture level, then you're trading something off. You've got to give away that hard skill that you have and learn that other people will be doing that. And you're going to be the person that makes the architecture comprehensible, reproducible, so that people can follow it and that the business values it. And when you find yourself doing that, that's when you know that you're making a change. I don't think you can just click your fingers and make it happen. If it's to be super respected if people have become an architect in a discrete discipline. It's their personal choice to work out whether they have more fun talking out and talking up, or whether they have more fun talking to machines.
Okay, that's all the time we have for questions right now. So maybe you can connect with Mark offline if you guys have any more questions.